When I came back from my business trip, I expected peace. 10 long days of meetings, hotel rooms, and flight delays had left me craving the comfort of my own home. My house had always been my safe haven, a place built brick by brick with my blood and sweat. Every corner, every piece of furniture had meaning. But as soon as I opened the door, I froze. The smell hit me first: fresh paint, chemical polish, and something artificial that drowned out the warm scent of home. My living room was unrecognizable. The old oak shelves I had carved myself were gone, replaced by shiny white cabinets. The soft armchair where I spent evenings reading was nowhere to be found. The curtains, my late wife's favorite, had been ripped away, replaced with cheap modern blinds. And standing there, arms folded, was my daughter-in-law. "Oh, you're back early," she said, her tone flat, not even a trace of guilt on her face. I looked around in shock. What have you done to my house?" Her lips curved into a smile, the kind of smile that hides daggers. "Renovated. You should thank me. It was so old-fashioned. Now it actually looks like a place worth living in." My chest tightened. That house was more than walls. It was memory, history, legacy. She had stripped it away without even asking. Before I could respond, my son walked in. He didn't look surprised. "Dad, don't be upset. We thought it was time for a change." She took the initiative. "You'll get used to it." Used to it. My own son, who grew up playing under those shelves, sitting on that old armchair, eating dinner at the wooden table I had sanded with my own hands. He stood there siding with her. The betrayal burned deeper than the renovations. I clenched my fists but kept my voice steady. "This is my house. You had no right." My daughter-in-law raised her eyebrow, her voice dripping with arrogance. "Maybe, but you're not the only one living here anymore. Times are changing. You should too." At that moment, something shifted inside me. I had built this house, this family, this life. And now, they thought they could erase me, rewrite everything without consequence. I didn't argue further. Not yet. Because I knew what she had done without my consent would become the very reason she'd regret underestimating me. I barely slept that night. I lay awake in the guest room of my own house. The room I never used but now felt like a stranger's refuge. Every creak of the new furniture, every sterile smell of the paint, reminded me that I had been pushed aside in my own home. In the morning, I walked quietly through the house. The photographs of my late wife, once proudly displayed on the hallway wall, were gone. My daughter-in-law had replaced them with abstract art, meaningless splashes of color. I found the photographs stacked carelessly in a box, shoved into a corner like garbage. My heart ached. Those weren't just pictures. They were pieces of my soul, pieces of the woman who built this life with me. When I confronted my son about it, he sighed, already rehearsed. "Dad, don't overreact." She thought the old stuff made the house look depressing. "We still have the photos. You can keep them in your room." Your room. As if the rest of the house didn't belong to me. My daughter-in-law walked in, sipping coffee like she owned the place. "You really should appreciate the upgrades. The kitchen alone costs thousands. I managed everything while you were away. That deserves some respect." Her words dripped with entitlement. She hadn't spent a single penny. It was all my money, pulled from my accounts, as if she had the authority. I said nothing. Not because I agreed, but because anger, when unleashed too soon, burns out quickly. Patience, I told myself. Let her think she's in control. Let them both believe I'm too old, too weak, too sentimental to fight back. But inside, I was already planning. That afternoon, I called an old friend, my lawyer. I explained everything, from the renovations to the way they had made decisions without me. He was silent for a moment, then said, "You'll need proof of how far this goes. If they've used your accounts without consent, if they've crossed into financial decisions, then they've crossed a legal line." That was exactly what I needed to hear. So while my son and his wife continued to strut around my house as if it were theirs, I began gathering evidence. Bank records, receipts, even photos of the changes they had made without my approval. Each detail, no matter how small, became a weapon I quietly added to my arsenal. At dinner that evening, my daughter-in-law smirked across the table, her tone condescending. You see, you're already getting used to it. This house is so much better now, isn't it? I forced a thin smile and replied, oh yes, it's all falling into place. And she laughed, not knowing how right I was. Because soon, very soon, she would learn that I hadn't survived this long by being blind. And she would regret every nail, every stroke of paint, and every word spoken in arrogance. The days that followed were like a performance, one where I pretended to be the helpless old man while secretly preparing my stage. My daughter-in-law strutted about, showing neighbors the new look of the house, proudly declaring, "We modernized everything while Dad was gone." I noticed something odd one evening. A contractor came by, dropping off an invoice. He looked surprised when he saw me and asked, "Sir, will you be making the payment directly, or is your daughter-in-law handling it again?" Again. That one word ignited suspicion. I pressed gently, pretending ignorance. "She's been handling the payments," I asked. He nodded. "Les, Mayim said you approved it all." She used the joint account. The joint account, one I had reluctantly set up years ago for emergencies. Suddenly, everything clicked. She wasn't just redecorating. She was funneling my money, controlling the flow, and slowly pushing me out of my own financial decisions. That night, I went through my bank statements. My lawyer's words echoed in my mind, "Look for patterns." And there they were. Payments I had never authorized, transfers I hadn't signed, even withdrawals tagged under her name. It wasn't just arrogance anymore. It was theft. The next morning, I asked my son casually, "Tell me, how much have the renovations cost us?" He looked puzzled, almost nervous. "Well, I haven't seen the bills, Dad. She's been handling all that. But it's fine. You'll love the results." Love the results. My house had become a monument to their greed. And my son, blinded by loyalty, or maybe laziness, didn't even realize he was being dragged into the mess. That evening, while they both relaxed in the living room, bragging about the compliments from neighbors, I quietly excused myself. Upstairs, I made copies of every financial record I had collected so far. Each page was a nail in the coffin of their little scheme. Later that night, I overheard them whispering in the kitchen. "She doesn't even realize how easy this is." My daughter-in-law chuckled. "She, you mean he," my son corrected softly. "No," she said coldly, "I mean his house, his money, his assets. Soon, they'll all be ours. And when he's too tired to argue, he'll just give in." I froze. My blood boiled. But I stayed quiet. They thought I was weak. They thought I was blind. But they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives underestimating me. I walked back to my room, each step steady, controlled. In my mind, the plan was already forming. It was no longer just about protecting my house. It was about teaching them a lesson they would never forget. Because when the curtain finally fell, it wouldn't be me left empty-handed, it would be them. I didn't sleep much that night. Their whispers echoed in my ears, every word slicing deeper than the last. His house, his money, his assets. They weren't just greedy. They were predators circling their prey. But they had forgotten one thing: I built this home brick by brick, and every corner still answered to me. The next morning, I began my act. I pretended to be tired, confused, even grateful for the changes they had made. I smiled when my daughter-in-law showed me the new marble counters, nodded politely when my son pointed out the fresh paint in the hallway. They believed my silence meant surrender. Meanwhile, I visited my lawyer in secret. I explained everything, showed him the invoices, the bank statements, even the copies of unauthorized transfers. His eyes widened. "This is fraud," he said firmly. "We can move everything, property, accounts, into a trust. She'll never touch a cent again." By the end of the week, my assets were no longer in my name alone. Every account she thought she had control over now belonged to a locked vault of legal protections. All without them suspecting a thing. But that wasn't enough. I didn't just want to protect myself. I wanted them to feel the ground crumble beneath their feet. So I played along. I let her talk about our home and listened while my son repeated her words like a parrot. I even allowed her to host a dinner, inviting her friends to showcase their renovations. The house buzzed with laughter that night, but all I could hear was arrogance dripping from every corner. When dessert was served, I excused myself quietly, returning moments later with a leather folder. I placed it on the dining table, right between the sparkling glasses and their smug smiles. "What's this?" she asked, her tone dismissive. "Proof," I said softly. "Proof of everything you've been doing behind my back." Her laughter faltered. My son frowned. She flipped the folder open and froze. Pages of bank statements, invoices, and photographs stared back at her like an open wound. Her hand trembled, but she tried to recover. "This means nothing. You gave me permission." "No," I replied, my voice calm but sharp as steel. "I gave you trust. And you turned it into theft." The room went silent. Even her friends shifted uncomfortably. My son looked between us, confused, anger rising in his eyes. But before he could speak, I placed another envelope on the table. "This," I continued, "is from my lawyer. As of yesterday, every asset is secured. The house, the accounts, the land. You have no access to anything. Not now, not ever." Her face drained of color. My son's mouth opened, but no words came out. For the first time, their confidence cracked, and I could see the panic ripple through them. I leaned back, folded my hands, and looked directly into her eyes. "You thought I was weak. You thought I wouldn't fight back. But you've forgotten one thing. I built this family, and I know exactly where to strike when someone tries to tear it apart." The dinner ended in silence. Plates sat untouched, glasses half full. The performance was over. The masks had fallen. But I wasn't finished yet. This was only the beginning. After that dinner, the fortress of their arrogance began to quake. The first tremors were quiet, small, desperate moves that betrayed how little control they actually had left. Leela reacted the way spoiled people do, when stripped of entitlement, with a tantrum that tried to look like righteous anger. She posted furious messages on social media about being ostracized and humiliated, painting herself as the victim. She called neighbors and old school friends, spinning tales about being mistreated in her childhood, implying I was a tyrant who'd finally snapped. She wanted an army of sympathizers, people who would knock on my door, demand apologies, and shame me into undoing what I'd done. It didn't work. People who had seen her at brunches and parties for years knew the tone of her laughing eyes. Sympathy turned thin when confronted with receipts, permits, and facts. A couple of neighbors who'd once leaned toward gossip shrugged it off. Some had kids she'd ignored. Others had seen how she ordered the gardener around like a queen. The Instagram rally fizzled because facts are harder to smear than lies are to tell. Her next move was cruder. She tried to access a credit line I kept for household emergencies and, failing that, called the contractor to demand deferred payments. When the contractor explained the account was under my signature and payments had been authorized by me, she roared in public. She dragged my name through small groups, at the salon, at the school gate, trying to manufacture scandal. I felt the sting, but I also felt a strange peace. The more she clawed, the more obvious her desperation became. Meanwhile, my son changed. I watched him like a man watching ice melt, slow, inevitable, and revealing what lurked beneath. At first his face was rigid with the need to defend her. Habit had made him reflexively protect the one he loved. But the truth is a patient teacher. Bills he'd never examined before sat on the kitchen counter, and could not be dismissed as mistakes. Phone records showed transfers. The contractor's ledger showed dates. A text she'd carelessly written, left open on a tablet, spoke of covering expenses until Dad quiets down. It was petty, but it was damning. One night he threw open the laundry room door and confronted her. The house was suddenly smaller than before. Every room an evidence box. "Why didn't you tell me?" he demanded, voice breaking. She flung back the old line. Blame him for not paying attention. But even her practiced anger sounded frayed. He held up the ledger, the printed statements, the copies I'd left folded under a magazine he always read. Is this true? He asked, the man he'd been and the son he wanted to be struggling inside him. She looked at him, and for a crack of a second, there was fear, real fear, not the performative fear she'd worn when friends were nearby. We'll pay it back, she said, as if those 3 words could stitch a net under a falling building. I'll get a job. He laughed then, a brittle, small sound. You spent months telling me it was all fine. You told me to trust you. His shoulders slumped in a way that ages a person. I trusted you. Then he did something I hadn't seen him do in years. He left the room without further defense. That night he came to my study, closed the door, and sat across from me like a man stripped of armor. There were no accusations in his eyes, only empty shock and a grief I recognized. I don't know what to do, he whispered. I love her, but I can't ignore this. He pushed the folder toward me. The same folders I had been compiling. Then sat back as if waiting for punishment. I reached across and placed my hand over his. You don't have to do it alone, I said. I didn't want this for you. I wanted a family. But we'll fix this, together. His shoulders shook once, pride and pain warred. He finally nodded. Leela noticed the change immediately. The man she'd charmed at dinner parties now asked direct questions about invoices, and, worse for her, about loyalty. She started to lose the easy smiles. Her friends, one by one, drifted away, some whispering that loyalty to her felt expensive, others visibly uncomfortable that they'd been invited into a house built on someone else's patience. Her final, most reckless act was born of panic. She stormed into my study one afternoon while contractors were fixing a small leak, her face all color and accusation, and accused me, loudly, of elder abuse. She called social services, spun a scene that made the contractor uneasy, and tried to turn public institutions into instruments of revenge. It was meant to shame me in front of the crew, to get them talking, to make the house a minefield of questions. But she had misjudged 2 things: the solidity of the evidence I'd conserved, and the people around me who had seen her true self. The social worker arrived, took her statements, and then, with clinical politeness, reviewed the ledger, the account logs, and the contractor's paperwork. She asked calm, precise questions, and the answers pointed like a compass back to one conclusion. The decisions had been unilateral on her side, and the elder abuse claim was hollow. The social worker left with a list of referrals for mediation. Not for me, but to help Leela manage consequences. Her world finished unspooling when the contractor, a man with a good heart and a firm memory, went silent no longer. He produced an email thread she'd sent, an admission that she'd used the joint account to authorize deposits, temporarily, promising to sort it out later. The proof was small, mundane, and painful. It made her real. Public perception shifted. Where she had tried to paint herself as a wronged woman, she now looked reckless and petty. Kids who once played in our yard began to avoid the swings by default. Parents who had accepted party invitations began to make excuses. The air in the house grew thin. At night I would sit at my kitchen table, the one she derided as old-fashioned, and stare at the ledger until the lines blurred. There was no joy in this victory. Only the strange, clear light of consequence. I had set the rules, protected my home, and faced the hardest part of all, teaching my son through example, that respect must be mutual. And though the house had been remade in colors I didn't choose, the foundation beneath it remained mine. My patience, my proof, my right to decide who lived within my walls. The unraveling was messy, human, and heartbreaking to watch, but it was honest. They'd written their own ending with thoughtless strokes. Tomorrow would bring the legal notice that closed the circle. But tonight, for the first time in months, I slept without the weight of uncertainty pressing on my chest. The crack in their armor had opened wide enough for truth to slip through. And truth, in the end, always finds a way. The morning the letter arrived, I already knew what it would say. The lawyer had been thorough, meticulous, and unwilling to let emotion cloud the facts. The envelope was thick, official, and heavy in my hands, like the weight of the past few months pressed into paper. I called my son into the study before opening it. He came in slowly, his eyes tired but clearer than I'd seen in years. There was no trace of denial anymore, only a man who had faced what he'd been avoiding. Leela lingered at the doorway, arms crossed, trying to mask her fear with defiance. When I broke the seal and unfolded the letter, the silence in the room was deafening. I read it aloud, voice steady. Effective immediately, the joint residency rights granted to Mrs. Leela are revoked. All renovation costs unauthorized by the homeowner must be repaid. Failure to comply will result in legal repossession of assets equivalent to the loss sustained. The words hit like thunder. Leela's face drained of color. She sputtered about unfairness, about being family, about sacrifices she claimed she had made. But my son didn't move to defend her this time. He simply sat down, face pale, eyes hollow, and whispered, "You did this to yourself." The fallout was quick. Within 2 weeks, Leela packed her things. She tried one last desperate plea, throwing herself into dramatic tears in front of neighbors, begging for sympathy. But no one came forward. They had seen too much, heard too many stories, and now the truth was undeniable. My son stayed behind for a while, ashamed, broken, but determined to rebuild trust with me. We sat together in the evenings, sometimes in silence, sometimes with long conversations about mistakes, love, and blind loyalty. For the first time in years, I saw the boy I had raised, flawed, but willing to learn. As for me, the house, though repainted and redesigned, was mine again. Every corner that once felt like an invasion now felt like a reminder that boundaries are not cruelty, they are protection. That silence in the face of wrongdoing is not peace, but surrender. Months later, I hosted a dinner in that same house. Not with grandeur or pretense, but with warmth. Close friends, neighbors who had stood by me. And my son sat at the table. Laughter filled the walls again, not the hollow kind forced at Leela's parties, but the genuine kind that grows from trust. Leela never returned. Rumors drifted about her moving to another city, trying to rebuild her life under a new story. But I no longer carried the burden of her choices. That night, as I stood at the kitchen window, watching the lights reflect across the yard, I realized something profound. She had taken my walls, my furniture, my paint, but she never took my home. Because a home isn't built by renovations. It's built by respect, honesty, and love. And those, finally, had been restored. The battle had been long, messy, and painful. But as I turned out the lights and climbed the stairs, I allowed myself one simple truth. I had protected what was mine, and I had won.